No one lays down the law like Car and Key. This is the Law Report on SAFM.
And a very good evening to you from tonight's Law Report program. Well, as you know, once a month here on the Law Report, we run a legal clinic trying to answer a range of questions on a number of different topics. And tonight it's again time to open the lines for you to ask that particular question that doesn't quite fit into the other topics we discuss here on the Law Report. So I'm joined once again this evening by attorney Nicoline Skuman-Low, and she's a director of Skuman Law Inc., Attorneys, Conveyancers and Notaries Public, practicing here in Cape Town. Nicoline, good evening. Welcome back to the show. It's our last get-together of the year.
Goodness, can you believe it? Thanks for having me.
No, I can't believe this year has seriously just gone way too fast for my nerves. Well, if you have any questions for us, you can call us on 0892 10 20 10, 0892 10 20 10. We just have a few emails to deal with, but you can call in the meantime. Just leave your name and number with my producer, and we'll call you back as soon as we're done with those emails. It's just two of them. But you can also SMS us on 40938. Right, Nicoline, two quite long ones and quite different ones, actually.
Yes.
Let's just start with the first one that we got. It says, I'm South African and married my wife, who's a Malaysian citizen, in June 2005. At the time, I was living in Malaysia and I had been there since 1999. So in my opinion, I was domiciled in Malaysia at the time of our marriage. My wife and I moved back to South Africa in 2009, bought a property which is registered in both our names. It has come to my attention that the entry where marriage is concerned is stated as married in. The following question now arises whether I'm married in or out of community or property. According to a lawyer at a company in Cape Town here in South Africa, South African law applies to my marriage, which states that you are automatically married in community or property if no prenuptial agreement was submitted when we acquired the property. The law of the country of the husband's nationality or domicile. I beg to differ that the law is outdated. The will not stand up in the constitutional court where, for example, same-sex marriages are concerned. It also is against gender equality. I've read a case of a husband and wife who got married in Mauritius and divorced in South Africa, where the SCA judge ruled against interpretation of South African marriage law because the couple were both domiciled in Mauritius at the time of the marriage. Please give me your input on this, as I find the ruling very interesting. I also need to then amend my will if South African law does not apply to my marriage.
Well, I think this is, in a global citizen context, a very valid question, actually, and I think it may benefit quite a few listeners to tune into the discussion at this point. Seeing that the world has become so small in terms of being able to travel fairly easily and in a timiest manner, this is something that happens more and more often. As South Africans, we often see that we move and work abroad, and as a result of that, this may very well be your reality if it's not that as yet. I agree with the listener to some extent that the law may certainly be fairly outdated. The rules that he refers to in regards to the law of the husband's domicile is a common law provision dating back many, many years. So in that context, it may very well need some interpretational update, specifically when it comes to homosexual relationships and even cohabitation. So, but that aside for a minute. Firstly, yes, all the rules and regulations that are mentioned do apply. So at the time of your marriage, regrettably, even though it is not exactly constitutional,
because he was living there for 6 years before they got married in Malaysia.
Exactly.
So would that not be considered his domicile then?
So remember, we need to distinguish between the concept of residence and domicile. There are two very different concepts from a legal perspective. So at the time of the marriage, it's about the intention, particularly, as unfair as it may be, or perceived as unfair as it may be, of the husband, not the wife, the husband's domicile. So in other words, it's about your intention, the place that you really in your heart of hearts see as home, and what your intentions are. Has Malaysia become, in this context, at that time, in his mind, and only he can really answer the question, was that their intention to stay there for the foreseeable future, and did he see that as his domicile?
But would it not matter that they were married in Malaysia?
Unfortunately not. Where the marriage is celebrated, even if you celebrate a marriage of foreign nationals in South Africa itself, it doesn't make South Africa the prevailing legal system just because it was entered into in South Africa.
Oh, okay.
So it's all about the husband's intention of what he sees as the place where he would return to and see as home at that point in time. And if that was Malaysia, yes, then the law of Malaysia applies to their marriage. And if they want to dissolve the marriage at some point in future, or if in terms of testate or intestate succession, you'll look at those legal provisions in interpreting what needs to happen. So domicile is a complicated matter, and we can argue about it subjectively in terms of what I felt is my home, away from home, and what my true intentions were at that point in time. Or the courts often look at a range of variables to give them an indication as to your true intentions. So, for example, if you owned a substantial amount of property, for example, still in South Africa, and you were sending money here, it could count against you in terms of establishing whether or not it was truly your intention to make some other country your domicile, just by example. Or simultaneously, or the flip side of the coin rather, if you acquired lots of property or opened bank accounts, you closed everything in South Africa, you had nothing here, you may or may not have had family, but that was a social interaction, then it could point towards your intentions being that your domicile was in Malaysia. So this is no simple matter. Now, I'm quite aware of this Supreme Court of Appeal judgment, which could also count in their favor. But again, the court considered quite a few factors in determining what the intentions of the husband were at that point in time and what he saw as his domicile, which is more than residence. It's more than an address. It's about how you transact, how you're running your life. Have you, in other words, transported what you had in South Africa as a home and everything that goes along with it? All the connections, all the property, all the bank accounts, everything, all the transactional side of things. If that moved over, then you should be able to prove it, and then you need to address the deeds office issue if it is an error indeed. Remember, married in could also be married in terms of the laws of Malaysia.
You need to find out what the rest of the sentence is.
Exactly. It is not necessarily married in community of property.
So you need to go and find out what the rest of that sentence says.
Yes, and if you want to make the amendments, then to seek legal advice to prove that and to correct whichever records you wish to correct.
Right, we've got one more email to get through, which we're going to be doing now. But if you'd like to call in the meantime, 0892 10 20 10 or SMS on 40938.
No one lays down the law like Car and Key. This is the Law Report on SAFM.
Right, our last email, if you'd want to call in, 0892 10 20 10 or SMS on 40938. Right, this one says, my question is regarding my father's will, which he drew up with a particular trust, who are the executors and trustees of his will. My father's will for his life partner of 13 years and his 4 adult children reads that his life partner inherits the home they shared, his pension and all the vehicles at the time of his death, as well as the furniture, all household goods, and his personal items, and his 4 adult children inherit the residue of his estate, being his primary residence and his bank accounts. His death occurred on the 23rd of November 2017. His funeral took place on the 30th of November 2017, and his death certificate has still not been registered by his life partner. My question is regarding his bank accounts, as these will be paying for rates and taxes and other house expenses. Does his life partner have the right to continue to use his bank account cards and internet banking accounts for as long as she likes, until she registers his death certificate for her own personal purchases? Is this legal? Does she have legal access to do as she pleases until she chooses to register his death certificate? She said she had not wanted to register it, saying that she's too stressed out to do so and needs time. We are aware that she's using these bank accounts and that they are not yet frozen. We are concerned that she will cause us to inherit debt. My question is, would she be legally required to pay back any money after he died on the 23rd of November? Would this be considered theft from the estate? Would we be able to request bank statements on his bank accounts if I was suspicious that cash was moved electronically using online banking when he was in hospital hours before his death? Would she be held liable if she did remove cash during this time? How and who would I go to request to see these bank statements, and is there anything I can do to recover lost funds? None of us are in a position to hire legal assistance. I myself am unemployed. My final question is regarding his house, his primary residence, which the 4 adult children inherit. If it takes a few years to get sold, the taxes and levies and rates will pile up and attract interest. Is there a possibility that we could end up inheriting debt only?
Goodness,
It's quite a long, involved story, and it sounds a little sketchy to me. That's just me, and I'm not an attorney, but it just sounds a little sketchy.
I think that there are multiple facets to this, so let's take it one at a time. First and foremost, a certain trust, as you've pointed out, has been appointed the executor of the will. Now, that is very important because the executor is the person who steps into the shoes of the deceased when they die, which means they are the responsible people for registering the death certificate with the master of the High Court and all these processes that follow. So they should be in contact with the funeral home that dealt with this, or if it was a medical death, of course, with the medical practitioner. So first and foremost, you need to contact the executor, which is the trust, and to ensure that they get the ball rolling. I would also report the suspicious behavior on the bank accounts, particularly after the father's passing.
Because the children are supposed to inherit what's in the bank account, and she's going on spending it.
If she's taking any money out of that, she should either repay it out of her personal pocket, or it should be set off from whatever else she's inheriting. So that's very important to bring to the executor's attention sooner rather than later. As for the money that has been spent or potentially spent just before the death occurred, unfortunately, if the father had shared his login details with anyone else, it's like when you are alive and you share your PIN number or your bank account, internet banking facility, login details with a close friend, family member, a loved one, and they abuse it. You can't go to the bank and say, listen, this person has stolen from me because you've shared that information. So
yeah, but sure, I mean, if they were together and they were operating on a bank account, and she knew full well that money was supposed to go to his children, and yet she's now moving it around and taking it.
The bank probably won't get involved.
No, not the bank, but can't they say, look, you've taken that money, you need to pay it back?
You can, but if she refuses to and says, but he said I can.
Well, he wouldn't have left it to them in his will if he wanted her to have it, would he? I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I don't like that sort of thing.
No, of course not.
You know?
I wouldn't like that either. But unfortunately, if arrangements were made and account details were shared and logins were shared, the bank won't get involved if you complain. They'll say, it's between them. We recommend you don't share that type of information with anyone else. You chose to do it. The risk is only yours. So that's generally, in my experience, the stance that the bank would take. From reporting her to the police for theft, similarly, if she says, no, but I had permission, he couldn't manage his own affairs, and I used the money to pay for transport to get to the hospital,
or they could see what she maybe used if she was going off,
or
enjoying
if she drew
herself.
Cash, if she was smart enough, she drew cash, and who knows? Then it's your word against
the listener's
theirs.
concerned that she's moving this money around electronically. There would be a trail.
Of course, if the money
suddenly ends up in her account from his account, then you would have something. Possibly the trust people could get involved here and say, but you weren't supposed to do that.
Exactly.
So, but
depends what
the listener says, would she be legally required to pay back any money that she took after he died?
After he died, clean cut. No one has access to a deceased's bank account with or without the sharing of that information by the deceased. You shouldn't touch any money, even if you were the caregiver or the child or whoever you were to the deceased. If someone dies, you hands off of the money. You hand it over to the executor. The process follows. If you need money, you apply to the executor to give you an advance on your inheritance or to prepay for certain necessary expenses. But you don't just go off on own accord and put the money, put your fingers into the pot, as they say.
Okay, so let's just clarify this for the listener, because we did say originally that if he'd shared his bank login details, it wasn't really anything they could do. But it was they're talking about
money
after.
before.
No, they're talking specifically about the money after the father died.
Yes.
And they say she's moving it possibly and helping herself to the money. But why would the executors not have had those bank accounts frozen in the first place?
Well, first and foremost, the 30th of November is less than 2 weeks ago.
No, he died on the 23rd of November.
Yeah, 23rd of November.
The funeral was on the
funeral,
30th.
and that's when you get the death certificate, unless it was a medical
that's 2
death.
weeks.
So it's 2 weeks ago. It takes about a week or two, depending on the funeral home, depending on the medical practitioner, depends on the manner of death. We don't know how he died. So I've heard legitimately of it taking up to 3 weeks, because there could be delays on Home Affairs side to issue the certificate, etc., etc. So give or take, we are now on the 11th of December. Give or take, we 11 days from the 30th of November. So yes, you need to escalate this, but the escalation needs to happen by the executor.
Okay, so at this point now, the death certificate hasn't been issued.
Step one is go to the executor.
Okay.
Step 2, get the executor to lodge the death certificate with the Master of the High Court. That's step 2. Step 3, tell the executor about the suspicious activity post-death, right? Yeah. And have them investigated and freeze the accounts now as a matter of urgency. Fourthly, my opinion about the money before death.
No, this is never about. This is only after. This all happens after the death. That's the whole point. Everything seemed to have happened after the death.
While he was in hospital. I'm talking about the third last paragraph.
Okay.
Would you be able to request the
she's
bank
using
statement
his bank
while he was in hospital, hours before his death? So that claim you're talking about in your third last paragraph.
Cash was moved electronically hours before he died.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
if he shared his login information or internet banking details, then she won't be. You'll find it really difficult to address that, because she can have a number of possibly legitimate reasons, or she could have moved cash by purely withdrawing it and you don't know what it was spent on. If there are no receipts, there's no evidence, then you can't make an accusation of it being suspicious.
Well, I would hope that in this case, if it is suspicious and it is not something that should have been done, that possibly she wouldn't have thought too much about it and would have transferred it directly to her account. Then there's a paper trail.
Then, of course, then it could change. And if it's a substantial amount of money, then the executor would probably take this on and deal with it swiftly. But at the end of the day, I would say the listener needs to get on the phone first thing in the morning.
Before Christmas holidays start.
It's already a really bad time of year to get this done. But you need to keep your side of things clean. Make sure you report all of what you've shared with us to the executor and escalate them dealing with the matter.
And it has to happen like tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Don't wait longer than tomorrow morning.
No, definitely not.
Right. Okay, if you would like to call us, we're done with the emails now. Call us on 0892 10 20 10 or SMS on 40938.
No one lays down the law like Car and Key. This is the Law Report on SAFM.
Right, we're going to take some calls now. If you'd like to call in, it's 0892 10 20 10 or SMS on 40938. And it's our law clinic tonight. So Nicolene, very bravely every month, comes in and literally takes on anything that isn't that isn't property related or labor or any sort of labor related questions. Those have specific programs. Anything other than that. And her favorite thing is wills and estates and things like that. So if you've got any questions about those, give us a call. And that's exactly what Colin has done in Cape Town. Colin, good evening.
Good evening, Corin, and good evening to your guests.
You've got something about executors and banking.
Yeah, no, a bank.
Oh, a bank, okay.
I heard your guest talking about the banks normally freeze everything once you deceased, you pass, you know? Now, the question is this. Take myself now. I've got a burial policy at a bank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And of course now I contribute every month towards it. Now, does that get frozen, or will a bank release that on request of a death certificate, but freeze the rest of the money and leave it to the executor to continue with?
Well, I think we need to draw a distinction between a insurance policy, which is a burial policy or, for example, life insurance, etc., versus a bank account. The bank accounts get frozen as an anti-fraud measure. So the minute the death certificate has been issued either by the medical practitioner that possibly treated the deceased person or certified them as being deceased, or the funeral home, it depends on what happens exactly, they would issue the death certificate through Home Affairs, and once that is submitted to the bank, if you to council, whatever, all your accounts get frozen and they don't ring up more costs, and your bank account gets frozen so that someone can't abuse the facility. So that's the reason behind it. A burial policy won't be frozen because the purpose of it is to pay for your funeral or your memorial or whatever your religious preferences are. So that will pay out, and depending on the type of policy and the policy document, that will determine when it gets paid. So some of them pay same day as someone is then certified as being deceased. Others pay in 30 days, etc. So it really depends on how it's been structured. How long your loved ones will wait for the money to pay for the funeral.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Because I was just wondering if it takes a couple of days or something like that, So, say for argument's sake, your spouse or a family member goes to the bank and produces the ID and the death certificate. Then I can't see the bank withholding that insurance.
No, of course not. And if they do, they can be reported to the Ombud. So I think just so that you can get your planning and at least that the people that would be having to deal with these arrangements, I think it's a good measure to at least phone the broker at the bank and just ask them how long you'll be waiting for your money, because as I said, some policies pay out immediately, some in 48 hours, some in 7 days, some in 30 days.
This is immediately,
Okay.
Yeah.
So just make sure that it is the case. I mean, the last thing anyone needs is to go and incur debt in order to pay for a funeral because they're having problems with the policy not paying as you thought it would in terms of the waiting period, whether it's a day, 24, or another 24 hours, 48, 7 days, or a month. Some policies actually take 30 days.
I hope that's given you some peace of mind, Colin.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have any questions? 0892 10 20 10 or SMS on 40938. Sifo in Ladysmith, good evening.
Good evening, ladies. How are you doing today?
Very well, and you? You've got one of those things you want to talk about that people sort of start hyperventilating when you mention it.
All the time. And I don't know if we'll ever get over it.
Gym contracts.
Yeah. In 2014, I opened up a gym contract. I was in Durban at the time, and I was hoping to have the contract for 6 months. When I got home, I realized that the contract had been signed up for 18 months. No, I'm not lying, for 3 years, 36 months. So I went back to the gym the next day, tried to speak to the same consultant. He wasn't there. They sent me through to the next consultant. I tried to cancel. They said they put it down in their record that I was trying to cancel and that a mistake had been made. Days went by. They didn't get back to me. I wrote again. They didn't get back to me. A couple of months later, I went back. I requested the records. They couldn't find the guy. The consultant had left. And they said they sent through all their records to, I think, Johannesburg or Pretoria, and they couldn't find the records. So I didn't have I carried on paying, and then I moved provinces, and I informed them I had already tried to cancel the contract, and they hadn't assisted me with that. And eventually, I stopped paying the contract. I stopped going to that gym, and then this year, I get a letter from them saying they want to blacklist me. I haven't been paying their contract. And I don't understand. And yeah, that is my issue.
Sounds like a bit of a nightmare there. But he went back a day after you. Don't you have a cooling off period for contracts?
Yeah. In terms of the Consumer Protection Act, which became effective in 2012, portions of it, and it was. The point is, by the time that you entered into a contract in 2014, it would have been fully effective, which means everyone has the 5-day cooling off period, right? So you've got 5 days after entering into a contract. If you change your mind for whatever reason, then you can cancel and there's no cost associated with it. So they shouldn't have made you pay for anything, even for a cancellation or to continue paying for this contract in the first place. Secondly, the Act also provides for cancellation of fixed-term contracts and for fixed-term contracts not to exceed 2 years. So they've transgressed a number of provisions in national legislation, and I would actually advise you to try and report this to the Consumer Commission for investigation. And if possible, of course, they've now already threatened you with blacklisting to, as a matter of urgency, to reply to that or to get an attorney to reply to that. Don't just leave it.
Sipa, how long have you actually been paying this thing now? How far along is this contract?
It expired at the start. I think it was mid-June this year.
The 3 years.
Paying it for no. What happened was initially I signed a contract for three, when I realized that the contract was for 3 years, I carried on paying, and then when I got fed up, I stopped paying, and then apparently that's where I went wrong. I was meant to carry on paying, so then these Afrikaans ladies start calling you from I think they're debt collectors.
Probably.
They request their money back. So then because I didn't want to get blacklisted, I obviously got back into it. I think about 2 or 3 months back, and I said I'm prepared to pay. So I've started paying again. But yeah, I think my mistake was that I stopped paying. Apparently I wasn't supposed to stop paying up until it was sorted out. But my issue was I'd been trying to sort it out for months on end, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So that's when I decided to stop. But
so how much longer are you? How much longer are you supposed to be paying for?
No, they wanted. They gave. I think they want. So they want 2 years for a membership fee. I think which is 360 rand a month.
Oh no, that's just no. You say they want you to pay for another. The mistake you made was starting to pay again.
Well,
at this stage, I think.
Firstly, I think a few things, as I've mentioned, is you've got the 5 days, and you should have insisted if you didn't want to proceed with the contract that you wouldn't be paying.
You tried.
So after the 5 days, you should have stood head and shoulders behind your decision not to pay. The fact that you continued paying up to a point means the prescription period, in other words, that 3-year period, could have lapsed by now, from 2014 to now. But because you continued paying, it started running from the start every single time. So if they claim anything from you at this point in time, then you can't argue prescription. So the only thing you can really do at this point now is to take a firm decision whether you're going to pay or not, and either to go and seek legal advice so that they can reply to this letter threatening the blacklisting and deal with it so that they don't just go ahead and do it behind your back. And secondly, in terms of the payments that you've made, to consider reporting it to the Consumer Commission or to claim it back with all the proofs of the many times you've tried to cancel or to cancel the contract, and to insist on your rights in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, which gives you the right to cancel.
Can he claim any of this money back?
Yes, I would recommend that you do. Otherwise, these guys will just do it to someone else, to be quite frank about it.
The biggest issue is they put you. I think you're scared of being blacklisted, and you've heard stories of people being blacklisted without even knowing. So that's why I get very afraid.
No,
so
of course. Don't just leave it. I think it's gotten to the point now where you'll need to make a decision. Either you're going to handle this yourself, and I really wouldn't recommend that. Because if it's escalated to debt collectors, it's a matter of time before they escalate it to lawyers. Or just blacklist you and then pursue it for years to come, and the costs just heaping up and heaping up and heaping up, and it becoming this major issue to deal with. So I would actually recommend that you seek legal advice now, get them to reply to that letter, and start the process of reporting these guys to the Consumer Commission. And possibly claiming your money back.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Good
mate.
luck,
I really-
Sipa. Yeah, you've actually given me cold shivers and nightmares for tonight now.
Just one question. Sorry, it's a bythought from my side. Have you tried some of these bigger companies? I'm not sure how big the one is that you've contracted with, but they often have internal complaints processes. In other words, that you can escalate a complaint through a certain process to a manager or a national person, you know. Have you tried that, to complain at that level?
Initially, when I signed the contract and I found that because I thought that I'd been deceived, I went through from the consultant to the manager, from the manager to the regional manager to the national manager, and they all seem to always be on the same page. It seems that when customers complain, it's as if customers are always wrong, and we all always seem to have the same complaint. And you'll find that gym contracts are mostly the same. People have the same type of complaints, and it's always the customer that's incorrect.
You need to report this, Sipa.
Well, then you need to, I need to concur with Karen. Then it's not just about your own rights and interests that you really need to stand up for, but I feel strongly to mention to you that you need to think about how this could potentially affect other people, and maybe to start setting a trend. If everyone's complaining about this, we know it's a common problem, then we need to stand up and do something about it.
Okay.
So report them.
Good luck. Sipa, if you get this right, please do phone in and let us know, because I would love to hear a positive outcome from one of these stories.
Okay. No, definitely will do. Definitely.
Please let us know. And good luck with that.
Good luck.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks. Good night to you. Bye-bye. If you'd like to call in 0892 10 20 10, or you can SMS us on 40938. We need to take a break, but we're going to do that shortly. But we'll take a call first. Victor in Creel, good evening.
Good evening. Sorry, man. I've got one question, man. I had my vehicle. I drove down to Cape Town, and I had a problem with my car. The radiator packed up. I had a radiator company replace the radiator. And after a couple of weeks of having the vehicle after the repairs, the gearbox packed up. And then I realized that those transmission fluid was leaking where the gearbox joins up onto the radiator. Before it broke, I first started off at Toyota for Toyota just to have the vehicle inspected for me. I actually wanted them to fix it, and then they told me there's a problem with the radiator. But they just sent me an email. They didn't. I didn't book it in. They just were doing me a favor to see if it's maybe a slight leak or something. Maybe they can fix it. They told me no, they can't do anything. So they said I must take it back to the company that installed the radiator. Tell them that there's a problem with it. I took it back to the company. The company. Before I took it back, I phoned them because I was a distance away. So I phoned the company. I told the company, hey, I'm having problems here with this vehicle. It's losing transmission fluid, and I've taken it to Toyota, and Toyota says I must take it back to you guys. And then because of work, I couldn't really get to them, and I told them if you guys can organize to have the vehicle. Then they said, no, I must drive it. Then I said, if I drive it, and if it packs up, who's going to be responsible? And in that time, the vehicle packed up. And then I took it back. Before I took it back to them, I called them. I tried to make arrangements for them to sort it out, and I haven't had it sorted out. And then I phoned. I tried to escalate it within the group, and they got back to me, and then they said they were going to have it inspected. They sent a video through to me, and then they showed me that the problem was with the connection. And then they said to me, it's not their responsibility. Now, my question was that, only they have worked on that connections, everything on the radiator, only they've worked on it. There was nothing wrong with the vehicle prior to that. Then I said to them, okay, what I would like to do is have someone independent to verify the problem. Then they were refusing. They said, if anybody else works on the vehicle, then I'm going to lose my guarantee on the vehicle. So I took it back to them, and then they got a letter from an inspection company. What's this company that for the motor industry?
Mm-hmm. The Motor Industry Federation, wherever they were.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. They got a letter to say no, that they cannot false the company and stuff like that. So I've got all the evidence in terms of what has transpired. I wrote everything to the ombudsman. Mm-hmm. The ombudsman comes back to me and asks me if I can give them proof, a letter from Toyota that will state that the problem that they found. Then Toyota responds to me and tells me they cannot issue me a letter because the vehicle was not booked in. But everything else, they don't look at any other evidence of what has transpired. All they just ask is for this letter. And besides everything else, the ombudsman tells me if I can't get that letter, then my claim is basically null and void. I'm not sure what's the way forward in something like this.
Oh, Victor, sounds like a bit of a nightmare there. Nicoline, what options does he have?
Well, if you've already taken it to the Ombudsman and the Ombudsman has made a ruling, the only way to appeal or have it reviewed is actually to take it to court. That's the next step.
I don't think there's a ruling. It's just the fact that he can't get this letter from Toyota.
Well, they are gonna issue a ruling to the effect that they find no wrongdoing on the part of the dealer or the person who did the maintenance or repairs. So when the ruling comes, and it's by the sounds of it, it's inevitable that it will come and it won't be in your favor, then the only recourse you would have if you feel that they haven't applied their minds or they haven't dealt with the legal aspects correctly is to actually take it on appeal, and that's a court process, which could cost a lot of money. So it depends on the amount that it would maybe cost you to have this fixed somewhere else, and to take an informed financial decision. So, for example, if it's going to cost you 20 or 30,000 rand to have this fixed, I can guarantee you appealing this through a court process is going to cost you at least that, if not more. So I'm not saying you don't have a right to appeal or have it reviewed. I'm just saying it will cost a lot of money and you need to make sure that it's worth it from a financial perspective. The RMI is also another structure that you could approach, but again, they're on the same decision-making adjudication level as any of the ombudsmen in the industry. So,
okay. Can I just respond on that?
Victor, if you can keep it quite short because we are running out of time and we've got other calls to go to.
I'll be quick. In terms of the RMI, they gave them a letter to say that they don't find any falsehood. That they said, I came to the dealer saying that I had problems with water leaks on the thing. I never said I had water leaks. I phoned them to tell them I had oil leaks. So in terms of the letter from the from RMI, it's actually not factual. Okay. So, and I've got a voice recording of that. So I don't understand. They don't take any of that into consideration.
But again, it's the same as the ombudsman decision. If you don't agree with it, and I hear what you're saying, and I just want to, I know this is very technical, but maybe this gives you some insight into how these structures operate. Any ombud structure, the minute there's a factual dispute, in other words, I say that pen is yellow and you say it's red, there's a factual dispute. Yes. The minute you have that, you have to have a process of cross-examination. In other words, you call witnesses, you go yourself, they call witnesses to prove why they say the pen is yellow and why you say it's red, for example. So that's the only way where someone can then look at the situation and say you are right and you are wrong, or you are lying or being dishonest, or you're not a credible witness and you are not, and therefore I find in your favor. So the minute there's a factual dispute, which there clearly is,
but he says he's got a recording of his conversation.
If there's a factual dispute, in no ombud structure will touch the decision making. They won't make a ruling, or they'll say they are unable to make a ruling, etc.
So even though he's got that factual evidence that they are lying, effectively, from what he's saying, if they won't touch it, he's got to go to court with that.
The structure isn't set up to deal with a process called cross-examination. If you deal with the ombud structure, regardless of which industry it is, the minute there's a factual dispute, when you complain with the ombudsman, let's be practical, you fill in a form and say, I'm unhappy about this. Then they get a chance to respond to that in writing. And then they ask you questions and they ask you, and it's all in writing. You can't listen to recordings. You can't question a person and say, explain this, or when did that happen? So that is what I mean by using the technical term cross-examination, and that happens in a courtroom. So your only recourse now, I'm sorry to say, is taking these guys to court. And I'm not saying you don't have a case. I'm just saying it's going to cost a lot of money, but if you've got all your facts in a row, then you should have a good chance, and it should be worth your while. So get some legal advice and take it forward on that way.
Victor, good luck with that. It sounds like a bit of a nightmare, but if you've got that voice recording with them, actually, with you saying what you say that you said, then you do have I'm not saying you have a case and go for it, because I don't want to be the one that's costing you all this money. You need to speak to somebody, a lawyer, and just discuss it and see what they have to say. Exactly. Your chances are. Good luck with that, Victor. I'm sorry we couldn't help you any further.
Okay,
thanks so much. Good night to you. Bye-bye. Right, KZN, Peter, good evening.
Yeah, hi, Karen.
Hi, hello. How can we help you, Peter?
Okay, my car was recovered at the police pound, and I identified my car. I'm unable to retrieve it because of the location. Is there any other way that I can retrieve my vehicle? I'm not talking about car carriers, because I have to fill some forms at the police station, and I'm unable to fill the forms because I cannot go to the place.
So this was a car of yours that was stolen, and the police recovered it?
They did recover it, and I have identified it, but to fill the forms, is there any other ways of filling those forms without me physically being at the pawn? Because I've got a car carrier willing to fetch it for me, but they're not willing to fill the forms, because they say that thing is a legal matter and I have to be there, and I'm unable to be there. So is there any other way, a method, legal method that I can fill those forms?
Well, you could give power of attorney to someone, like you would, for example, if you had to collect your vehicle license disc or so on. You have to write a letter, attach an ID, and attach the person's ID who will be collecting on your behalf. So I would recommend that you contact an attorney close by in the area, give them the mandate to go and go to the pound to fill in the forms on your behalf, to make copies of it, to send you copies of whatever they filled in, and to have it released to your carrier. That's what I would recommend. Usually you need to go yourself though, but an attorney would know how to handle it on your behalf.
And there's no other, apart from my attorney, there's no other people that I can contact?
You could, but at least, why I'm saying an attorney is they would know the legalities surrounding the release. And they would know what to fill in at which portion of the form and so on. So if you're not taking an attorney, you're always running the risk that the person's not going to complete the forms correctly, and that you could have or that the police would just simply refuse to release it to that person because...
Do you have an idea what the fees will be for hiring that attorney?
I have no idea, but I think contact a few close to where the pound is located and ask them to give you a quote. That's the safest, and then pick whoever you feel most comfortable with. But someone preferably with a bit of experience in criminal law, in other words, with stolen vehicles and that sort of thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Good luck, Peter. Thanks. Good night. We've got about 8 minutes left. If you'd like to squeeze in one more call, you can do so on 0892 10 2010 or SMS on 40938.
No one lays down the law like Car and Key. This is the Law Report on SAFM.
Right, back to the lines. Anella in Port St. John's, good evening.
Good evening to you, and good evening to you ladies. My question is not based on personal experience, but I'm speaking from a point of view of a concerned citizen. What are the, for instance, the charges laid against our president, Jacob Zuma, in which case he's always been able to evade them or try to delay the process? From a citizen's point of view, we all want justice. We know what is done in the past, and we know that he's responsible for a lot of bad things that are going on in our country. I was just wondering, is it possible for people such as himself and his son and et cetera, and other influential people who own properties in places like Dubai and have money in Swiss bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens?
Anela, this is actually not the kind of show that we discuss this particular issue on. So,
I just want to know about property, in terms of property. If you've got property in a place like Dubai, does that mean that you're immune, if you live there in that country, you're immune to being persecuted?
I don't understand the question.
Prosecuted.
Yeah. Okay. What, in that country?
You've got charges in a country like South Africa, but you've got property elsewhere and you want to go live there. Does that mean you, in a way, immune to being charged in your country?
Well, this is a difficult situation, and if we look at any extradition agreements, etc., it's not contingent upon where you live or where you have assets.
And if
there's wrongdoing and there's prosecution, then there are mechanisms to attach properties and money and accounts and all of that. So, to answer your question in a nutshell, no, that doesn't preclude prosecution or extradition or any of those mechanisms.
If the country has extradition treaty with South Africa, not all the countries do.
Yes. So if you don't have a treaty, then it's a much more difficult and cumbersome process, but it's not impossible. So no, that doesn't disqualify further action.
Okay, Anela, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay. I thought he wanted to talk about diplomatic immunity is what we were told he wanted to talk about. So I was quite surprised by what actually came up there. We've got about 5 minutes left of the show. Before we go, it's that time of year. It's the end of the year. We always make our New Year's resolutions. And I bet what yours will be for all my listeners.
Well,
make your will.
Yeah, of course. Always. I think we need to reflect back on 2017. It's been a tough year for most people. Most of us, it's been a very challenging year in terms of uncertainties and all sorts of things striking us left, right and center, some in and out of our control. So I think from both a business and personal perspective, there's a lot of lessons and reflections, lessons to be learned and reflections to be had in terms of surviving the tornadoes of life that tends to hit you. So I think this is a very valuable lesson-filled year for many of us in business and in our personal lives, how to plan things, how to accommodate for the uncertainties financially in order to plan going ahead. And of course, that it goes without saying to ensure that your affairs are always in order. You never know when something unforeseen happens. To have that estate planning done.
Business and personally.
Ensure your will is in order. Ensure that your continuity measures of your business are in order. And importantly, that your insurance cover and all these things are up to date with all the uncertainty around us and all the risks related to it. It's something that I think is fairly unpleasant to deal with, and we often forget about it, but we should really make a point of it. And I think last but not least, considering the drought and all these really challenging things that we've faced and will continue to face in 2018, it's very important for us to really tighten the belts, ensure that we plan, cut out those unnecessary expenses, I think that's key for next year. And even though if you're a business or you're an individual in the Cape region, we are facing quite a serious crisis. You can't be an ostrich and put your head in the sand. You need to consider how this could potentially impact your business, how it will impact you, how it will impact time off if we got to the point of having to collect water at certain points. How will you go about doing that? Will you be able to take time off? Or are you going to take turns with your spouse? we need to start planning and thinking about these things, and as I said, tightening the belt. I think we up for a challenge, but if we take the lessons from 2017, I think we can get over it. We're very tenacious people.
I always say they're bold and tough here, you know. I just wasn't so tough on Saturday when we lost yesterday when we lost the Sevens, Cape Town Sevens. I wasn't very tough then. I was very, very sad. But we'll be back in just a moment.
No one lays down the law like Car and Key. This is the Law Report on SAFM.
Right, so you've given us some good advice for going into the new year. We always make these New Year's resolutions at the beginning of the year. We never seem to keep them much past sort of the 3rd of January, you know. But we've got to try a bit harder next year.
No, we have to try. I think if 2017 was anything to go by, you should have grown a really tough skin, and please let it last past the 3rd. You may need it.
I think
you may need it.
I think so. But Nicoline, I have to thank you very much indeed for joining us for this year. It really has been an absolute pleasure having you. My listeners really enjoy having you on the show. So thank you. And we look forward to you joining us. You're going to be taking turns next year with Arinda. So
yes.
Thank you. It's going to give yourself with your little one a little bit of a break. And thank you. We look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you. So am I.
My thanks once again this evening to Nicoline Skuman-Low. She's a director of Skuman Law Inc., attorneys, conveyancers and notaries public, practicing here in Cape Town, and she's been my guest on tonight's edition of the Law Report program, and we'll be doing another law clinic on Monday the 12th of February. In next week's program, we'll be talking about the Voice of the Unborn Baby court case, finding out more about the proposed new road accident benefit scheme, talking about medical malpractice and getting the latest on the proposed employee rights of male parents in terms of parental leave. That's the Law Report next Monday the 18th of December, and I'll be back with you again tomorrow evening just after 9 with Health Matters. It's our monthly phone-in. My guest tomorrow evening will be Karen Barakovitz. She's the Executive Director of Dementia South Africa, so join me then.